Welcome everyone. My name is Martin Bradley. I am the head of gaming at MTM. Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world to you today. I have the awesome Chris Dring with me to have a conversation all about video gaming and innovation and new IP. Chris, I'll let you do a little intro in a second, but amongst other things, you are the editor-in-chief of the Game Business podcast and a very well-known and respected figure in the industry. So thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. How are you?
I'm all right. Yeah, I love this subject. This is one of my, I write about it a lot more than I should. So that's not because it's not interesting, because I over write about it probably. But yeah, it's really quite, yeah, I'm really good. I'm excited for this.
Awesome. Me too. And if our kind of prep call is anything to go by, we're certainly not going to be stuck for stuff to talk about today. I think cramming everything into 45 minutes is going to be our issue. And my job is to keep you on track. I guess you're on the other side of the microphone as such, to your usual day job for once.
Yes, yeah. Normally I'm I'm a journalist really, so I do most of the people read my stuff rather than listen or pod. But obviously the game business is all built around a show that we do. We do at least two a week, one on Tuesday, one on a Thursday. One on the Tuesday is an interview with somebody, and the Thursday ones we dive into the news of the week. And yeah, I host the show normally and ask the questions. But then we write all that up so people can read it. We put it as a podcast, out as a video. It's a multi-platform strategy, as a game developer would call it. But before that, I've been a journalist. I was at gamesindustry.biz for 8 years. I was the head of that. And before that, I was the editor of MCV. I've been at MCV for 9 years. So I've been a business journalist for, trying to do the maths now, 18 years or so. But yeah, this is certainly an uncomfortable situation. Normally I have to shut the person up.
Yeah, I mean, I have shared some questions with you, so hopefully you're not too surprised by what's coming. But for the sake of everyone, so we're here to talk about existing catalog in video gaming versus new IP. And by existing catalog, we mean everything from annual franchise sequels that are being rebooted from a dormant franchise, remakes and remasters, which is something we're going to touch on in a little bit more detail. And the role of that existing catalog, as we're calling it, against new IP and innovation in the gaming world. Now, we can see from the sales data, existing IP does really well. Most of the top 20 chart is existing IP, and new IP can struggle to get attention and sales. But what we're also here to talk about today is, what do players actually think about the role of new IP and existing catalog? So we have conducted some research at MTM into the topic with gamers in the UK and US, and I'm going to use some of the findings that we've got to facilitate the conversation today with Chris. Before we dive in, Chris, and I think I'm kind of putting this on you, I'm not sure if we talked before, but what is your favorite remake and remaster ever?
Good question. I've got two answers to the remaster one, and it's one because one's a cheat. So one of them is Rare Replay, which is a collection of rare games that came out 10 years ago now, where they put it all in a box. It was only like £20, I think. It was $30, and it featured 30 games from the developer Rare in it. They put in documentaries, and they did a big musical sing-song number to launch the video. It was really nice. Terrible business decision, by the way, giving out all of their best games in one package for $30. But but the real answer of my favorite remaster is a developer called Night Dive made a game called Remastered Shadow Man, which is one of my favorite games from the 90s. But they did the normal remaster job of making it run nice, make sure the controls are up to date and that kind of stuff. Resolution, they up-resed it. But they took a load of stuff that had been in that the developer hadn't quite had time to finish. So at the end of the game, there's 5 bosses you have to fight. And they actually put 3 of them in the same location. That wasn't the original plan. They had planned to have each one had their own level. They actually finished the levels. So it's almost like a director's cut, if it's not a term we use in video games. So that's my favorite remaster, I think, as an individual product. Really well done, very well executed, and it had extra stuff in it. And then my favorite remake is Resident Evil 2 remake. But I have to question, it feels almost like a new game. It doesn't look like Resident Evil 2. It doesn't play like Resident Evil 2. It's got a load of new stuff in it. The only thing that's the same really is the story. And in video games, movies, it's the same story. It's a remake. But in video games, I have to challenge, the thing is with retro and remasters and remakes and that kind of stuff is, what is the actual definitions of all these things? And Resident Evil 2 is almost like a new game than a remake, but it's an excellent one. That's most of my
You
two.
can tell we didn't talk about this in our prep call because Resi 2 was going to be my answer for my favorite
Sorry.
remaster and remake. It is an unbelievable game, and one of those games I came to after never playing it. I think I was 15, 16 when it came out. I wasn't into survival horror or horror in general, and it was just a franchise that escaped me, and I found later in life, and I think that's some of
But
the power of remakes
if you
and
go back,
remasters.
if you go back to Resident Evil 2, the original version, it plays nothing like the game that you've played. It's not. They're different games in many ways, with the same story. Fascinating fact: way more people, bought the Resident Evil 2 remake than bought the original Resident Evil 2. It's a far more successful game.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because we're going to dive into some of the detail now. I'm going to start with some stats, and I know from being a regular listener to your podcast, Chris, you love a stat, and often use stats in your podcast to facilitate the discussion. And these are actually from your site, from some data that you've got. So if we take 2025 so far and sales figures, only 2 of the top 20 in Europe are new IP, and they were both from Hazellight, Split Fiction, and It Takes Two. And It Takes Two was probably a bit of a bump. It's an older game. It was a bump from Split Fiction, which, by the way, is an awesome game. Claire Obscure Expedition 33 would probably be in there, but the publisher doesn't release figures. But 2 or 3 of the top 20, 10 or 15% were new IP. The rest was, as you would expect, it was Call of Duty, it was EAFC, it was Assassin's Creed. Red Dead 2 was in there, which I was really surprised about. GTA 5, as you would expect, but a mix of sequels and old franchises is in the list of the best-selling games. Now, gamers can only play what's available. And from some of the data that we found in our research is that gamers actually crave new experiences. So 69% of gamers believe there are too many sequels and not enough original games. 64% believe there's a lack of innovation in gaming right now, and 62% prefer playing new games over remakes and remasters. So the question to you, Chris, is how have you seen in recent years the balance shifting between existing catalogue and new IP in the release schedule for gaming studios?
It's a complicated question because the examples you gave there are if you look at for example that chart, that European chart, it is publishers that are part of the GSD, which is the charts company system, and they are the big publishers, and the big publishers are not releasing as many original games. But there's games like Peak, for instance, that did very, very well this year, and Blueprints and these sort of games, they're not in that chart. Those new, and there's quite a lot of them. If you ever follow Game Discover's podcast, newsletter, they're constantly talking about a game you'd never heard of that's just done 1 million copies. So there's actually loads of new IP that comes out all the time. However, when it comes to those big companies, they are doing less, and that stuff's the stuff that consumers see. It's the stuff that's on the front of the stores. It's the stuff that gets the biggest marketing budgets. The stuff that gets covered in the media, because the media cover the games that generate the most traffic for them, and they go for the guaranteed ones. They didn't realize Peak was going to do that many numbers. They didn't realize Claire Obscure was going to be a breakout hit. They don't know those things, so they go with the proven thing. So it looks like the industry is so much more consolidated on small titles, and certainly the top end of the industry is more consolidated on sequels and remasters and remakes and that kind of stuff. But actually, I think if you dig deeper, there's actually more new games than there's ever been. It's just we're not seeing it, and I think that's the discoverability challenge. But certainly, when it comes to the big companies, they are doing a lot more remakes. They're doing a lot more remasters to plug gaps in their schedules.
Yeah, and this issue of content discovery, we'll come back to later, because I think it's absolutely crucial to our kind of success of an industry and how we compete against other forms of entertainment. So we'll certainly come back to that issue. You mentioned it seems to be an issue of the AAAs and their strategy, and then the AA's, if that really exists as in the sense that they used to, and indie developers. There's this divergence in the industry. But if we think about the AAA's and maybe the AA's, but definitely AAA's to start with, why have they gone down this path of increased focus on existing catalog? Now, there's some very, very obvious answers, but I'm hoping we can have a bit of a chat about some of the less obvious ones as well, and why an EA, an Activision, a Ubisoft, most of what you're seeing from them is just sequels or existing IP.
Well, so, I mean, I can certainly talk to the first. Obviously, first, they're remasters and remakes. We start there. They're potentially lucrative, right? So our industry is of an age now where we have older players longing to go back to their youth and that kind of stuff. So according to Ampere, $1.4 billion was spent on remasters and remakes between January 2024 and September 2025. So there's clearly money to be made. That's the obvious answer. People are buying it. It's also worth, the other thing is the way the development world has shifted. So video games are taking longer and longer and longer to make, right? And so if you took a look at someone like, and not just sometimes because the graphical demands and the technical demands are so high. So a game like, you take a developer like Naughty Dog, who made 4 games during the PS3 generation, and so far in the PS5 generation, of which we're 5 years in, they haven't released a single one. That's because the demands, their expectations on those games. Even companies like Nintendo are making games that are having to be so much longer than they used to be. I went on How Long to Beat, Mario Odyssey, which came out in 2017. It's quite an old game now. It's 62 hours long. That's twice the length of any previous 3D Mario game. It's more than 3 times the size of Mario 64. So these games are taking 5, 6, 7, even 10 years to make. And third to that, you want to keep those brands relevant. You want to keep those big games that are taking longer and longer to make relevant. So there hasn't been a BioShock game for 13 years. So you go, right, how do we do that? And that's where remakes and remasters and other ways of bringing touch points into these games are happening. So that's one of the reasons why there's so many of those. It's because it plugged the gap in the release schedule. Yes, Naughty Dog haven't released a game in a long time, except they have. There's The Last of Us remake. There's The Last of Us Part 2 remake. Those games have plugged the gap between those 2 launches, and they've done extremely well to those numbers. In terms of sequels and that sort of risk aversion from the AAA side of things, if you're taking 5, 6, 7 years making something, that's a lot of money, right? So cost of video games, just people plus time. So if there's a lot of people spending a lot of time making video games, there's a lot of risk in there, and therefore you're getting fewer experimental swings. If you go back to like 2000s and 2010s, when we were all making, when the way we bought games, if you didn't make a game in a year or 2 years, didn't have a game out every year, you were in trouble. But nowadays, because your game would end up in the pre-owned bins, you didn't have any DLC to back, you didn't have that. Your game had a very limited window to make money. Now those games are living so much longer, because of that sort of strategy. You're taking longer to make these games. People can take longer to make games because of the fact that games are living longer, because there's live services, microtransactions. There's the cost of the big games are costing more, and therefore there's a bit of risk aversion going on. I do think, though, it's not just risk aversion from the industry. There's risk aversion from consumers as well. And I know you've got data saying they want new things, but they're not buying new things, right? And I think, and it's an interesting. We had Matt Piscatella, who runs Sakana, the big US data company, on the show, and he's got this theory that there's so much stuff being thrown in our faces all the time from all the different streaming services, all the different video game services, that we're almost always gravitating to what we know. We're going towards the known quantity. We're less likely to take a risk on something that might be good, might be rubbish, might be scary. We don't really know what we're getting into, and are far more willing to just try. Friends is one of the top rated shows on Netflix. Go on Apple TV, and Ted Lasso is either 1 or 2, and it's always number 1 or 2 in the charts on Apple TV. There hasn't been a new series for 2 years. People are gravitating towards those comfort places, those things they know. That's his theory, and there's an element of and I think if you're making games in this environment and you're watching what the consumers are buying and what they're saying they want, they seem to want the same things, and that's kind of what they end up getting.
Yeah, and that we'll come back to the role of nostalgia, I think, in a little bit as well when we focus on remakes and remasters. But you're right. I spend my life talking to video gamers and players and understanding their motivations. And ultimately, as games have got more expensive, again, especially at the top end, that risk aversion is definitely shown on the consumer side as well as the business side. I would definitely agree there. If you are going to fork out, what is it, $70, $80, we're getting close to the $100 game. Who knows what GTA 6 is going to be? Now it's been delayed again. Potentially we'll get to $100. But you're right, it's a lot of money. And if you're not sure that it's going to deliver the experience that you want, then why not buy something that you know is going to deliver with 95% kind of certainty? That is certainly something that we see from players as well. I just want to go back to something you said about games taking longer to make and kind of how long games are. Do you think one of the issues we've got now is that we've generally moved to these games that take 60, 80, 100 even hours plus to play and beat? Whereas when I grew up playing games, you'd have a 15, 20-hour single player narrative game and that was it. And that was a great experience. Do you think we've migrated as an industry to just building bigger and longer for players?
Yeah, yeah, we have. Although oddly, I think there's a trend at the moment just starting in games where people are rallying against that. So, there's a lot of challenges around the costs of video games and how do you get the cost lower. And some of that might be new technology and tools and AI and stuff, but some of it is just making smaller games. And so you are starting to see that push. You're starting to see that push in the other direction. Your games like Clair Obscur aren't that long, so you are starting to see things pushing in a different direction. But overall, as the big top industry, you can just see it. You go on something like How Long to Beat and put in a game and then put the sequel from 10 years down the line. I gave Mario as an example. Do it in games like Starfield and Zelda's now hundreds of hours long. Used to complete those in 20 hours. And that's the thing. They live in those games for ages. They update them, and then they take a life of their own. They come up on YouTube and people stream them and Twitch them and create communities around them. Yeah, so you've got that happening in terms of the big games. And of course you have live service games, which just never end. Or forever games, as people like to call them now. So yeah, you're definitely seeing that push, and that's creating a bigger gap between releases and more content.
Yeah, and just to kind of close the loop on this part of our conversation on why at the top end, again, just to focus on AAAs and why they are focusing on existing catalog. Is there anything that you think that those types of developers and publishers miss by doing so? And two of the big things that I've been thinking about recently are you're potentially missing out on new players, whether that's a new demographic or a new region who aren't exposed to your franchise or your titles or whatever it might be. And B, talent retention. So if we look on kind of the internal side, if you're constantly churning out the same types of games, are you actually missing out on keeping some of the developers who want to be creative and do something different? I just want to get your take on those kind of two things that maybe at the top end are they potential kind of downsides to this strategy that we're seeing?
I mean, yeah, you talk about, I think as an industry, industry's going through this period of stagnation, shall we say, lack of growth. And there's three ways in which we can get more growth. One of those is we can get more money out of our players. That's where the price rises and stuff are coming out. The second way we can deliver growth is by cutting costs so we can deliver margin growth and profit growth. And the third way of doing it is to bring in new customers. And there is an element of feeling like we've stopped trying to bring in new people. We've stopped trying to widen our appeal, particularly in that top end field. It's not true of everybody, but there's an increased focus on niches and targeting specific groups of people who are already gamers. And so, yes, there's an element of we're missing out on new customers and widening out that reach and sort of just, a new genre. Think about things like Pokemon Go or Wii Sports or Wii Fit and all those Guitar Hero that just brought in new audiences as well as became phenomenal amongst existing gamers. That's true. And as for you're talking about, the point is that game developers having multiple different things to work on rather than making the same game all the time. That's often something that we get cited. We decided into Obsidian recently, and Obsidian, of course, they make RPGs, but they make so many different games. They have multiple teams. They're able to move staff around from team to team in order to keep them fresh, keep them interested, and keep them engaged. That's obviously those are definitely true when it comes to things they're missing. But I mean, yeah, there's quite a few though different what I will say, defend this, remasters and remakes don't have to be, if we talk about those, or even sequels, they don't have to be necessarily lack of innovation. We talked about Resident Evil 2 earlier. And okay, the idea technically be done in Alien Isolation, it had been done in Slender Man, but that tyrant that followed you around in Resident Evil 2, right, and it chased you, you had no idea what it was going to be, and it just appeared and it would terrify you. That was an original idea. It never happened in Resident Evil before. It never been done before in Resident Evil game. Didn't exist in the previous Resident Evil 2. And so you can bring new ideas into sequels, and you can do new things with it. And there are companies with remakes and remasters, or remakes anyway, that you don't necessarily get from other you can do. There are examples of companies that do that well, but equally there are examples of there's an element of, in the past we took certain directions as an industry. So we might have everyone was making games like GoldenEye for a while, and then Halo came along, and then that's changed the direction of shooters, and then Call of Duty came along and changed the direction again. Those sort of things all blurred together a little bit. And you sort of go back to, there's a call to go back to some of that stuff and go, actually, what if we went in a different direction? And you can do that by going backwards and trying these experiences. There's a lot of things. One of the appeal of remasters in particular is you're playing games that don't exist today. They don't make games like them anymore. And you go, well, I wonder why that is. What if we did? And I think, so what you're saying is, I think I'm talking about things, you talk about things they miss by going backwards and not looking forwards, but sometimes there's stuff that they gain as well.
Yeah. And I'm glad you talking about remakes and remasters. That's exactly where I wanted the conversation to go now. We did quite a lot of research on remakes and remasters, and we found them really popular and appealing. So 90% of gamers in the UK and US have played one at some point in their gaming career or lifetime. 76% find them appealing. And one of the big things we found about remakes and remasters is what we talked about at the beginning, is the role of nostalgia. And nostalgia is everywhere in entertainment right now. It's throughout all of our lives, whether that is kind of film and TV, it's sports, all the different types of entertainment products we engage with. Nostalgia is back. And one of the things that kind of surprised me as I was doing this research, we were talking to some kind of cultural insight specialists. And they were saying how there used to be a 30-year kind of loop when it came to nostalgia. It took around 30 years for something to come back in. And because of the way the world is now with technology and social media and things like COVID has actually changed, the world, we're on a much shorter kind of nostalgia loop. Some people have said about 7 years, but it's generally under 10 years now, and it used to be around 20 to 30 years, which means that you're now seeing games on the same generation that get a remake and a remaster, which you kind of never saw before. And one of the things we found when it comes to nostalgia, it's this kind of 3 layers. There's one that's just that comfort of playing something you played when you were younger as a kid or whatever it was. It's that personal connection that you had to a title. We also found there's the sharing nostalgia. So that's a lot of that is people like me sharing with my son a game that I played as a kid, but it could be with other gamers that you've met along your years as a gamer. And then lastly, it's about discovering something for the first time. So like me saying at the beginning, Resi 2, I never played Resi 2 as a kid. I fell in love with the franchise later, and it was the remake that really kind of sealed the deal for that kind of franchise with me. I wanted to ask, do you think there's a risk that this emotional pool of nostalgia can overshadow innovative game design? Now, you said that there are some remakes and remasters that have some form of innovation, but I'm talking at a kind of a macro level. If a lot of developers are focusing on remakes and remasters, do you think that kind of stops the real innovation that brings out that wow moment that you get from something new?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's a nuanced conversation as always. The thing is with this whole debate is loads of contradictory stories. So there's 2 games that spring to mind about this, right? I Ukulele, which was the original Banjo-Kazooie team left the company and they made a new game which is basically Banjo-Kazooie, and they did things in that game that they actually ruined the game a little bit. So the text moved incredibly slowly because it did in the 90s. And that was an example of them. That's an example of literally doing something because it's old and it was a bad example. A better example might be the Callisto Protocol, which is very similar. It's a good game. It's a game made by the original Dead Space creators, and it's Dead Space. And the Dead Space team, it's Dead Space again. And it was hard for me it's hard to live up to the memory of such a classic. And indeed, interesting, Glenn Schofield, who was the director of the game and directed Dead Space as well, he told me recently, I interviewed him, and he said to me he has an idea for a horror game based in ancient Egypt. And I'm like, give me that game. A Dead Space game, a horror game set in ancient Egypt or about ancient Egypt made by the Dead Space team, I'm in, right? I want in, right? The same game again. And it was the same. They did some bits that were new, like we talked about some little bits of innovation in it, but it played so similar, didn't feel new or fresh or interesting. There has not been a lot of horror games set in ancient Egypt or any games set in that period of time. That interested me. That was cool. But they didn't do that. They went with something that was safe. I will say though, to contradict it a little bit, there are examples of games that didn't play it safe and actually put it in a safer setting in order to make that comfortable. So if you take before Nintendo completely ripped up the rule books with Zelda, they tested it with a 3DS game called Legend of Zelda: Link Between Worlds, and they were going, right, what if you had all the items at the start and you didn't have to collect this item to unlock that area of the game? What if you could do it all at the start? And that was quite a terrifying thing to do, really. It broke the Zelda formula. And they did it by setting it in the game, the same world as Link to the Past. So it's very nostalgic. It looks the same, it plays the same, it has that same vibe, but they broke the formula in doing it. Donkey Kong Bonanza, it feels like a Donkey Kong game, it feels like a Mario game, but also it's completely bonkers, it's completely different. There's loads of examples. This Mario Odyssey is really weird and bonkers, but it also taps into nostalgia because there's a whole level set in the Mario 64 level. And we talked about Resident Evil 2, which is, again, they did loads of new stuff in that game. But those are sequels. Even if you go to things like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, it's kind of Final Fantasy X, at least part of it is. Go to Space Marine 2. Okay, Space Marine 2 is a sequel, but it's very Gears of War-y. These are taking sort of old ideas, nostalgic ideas, things of people going, oh, I remember when games used to be like this, going into it. And then they gave something new within those confines. So yes, to answer your question, there is plenty of examples of nostalgia holding people back, nostalgia of trying to do things for nostalgic reasons. And actually, I think in this case, it would have been better off if you hadn't done it. But there are examples you can use nostalgia to help introduce new ideas where perhaps it might have been riskier to do it without, just completely fresh, and may not even done very well, or may not have attracted an audience at all.
Yeah, and I'm gonna back up what you said, and unhelpfully for anyone listening who wants a final answer on how to deal with the role of nostalgia and the amount of changes they should make. Our research showed it was completely split. We had literally a third of stick completely to the original, depends on the title, and you should make massive changes. And it was as split as anything I've ever seen. So I think the advice there is it's really about understanding your player base, right? There are some titles where you can get away with more changes, innovation, mechanic changes, new endings, even new characters, whatever it is. There's some titles where if you change one thing, the player base is going to be on Reddit and Discord within a minute, and you're not going to have a nice experience with that player base. I think the kind of advice is understand who your players and potential players are when it comes to the specific title.
One thing I'll give, so that advice, so that you're glad that you answered the question, because you sent me that question in advance, and you said what advice would you give? And I'm like, there is no one answer to this question, and because it does differ but I'll give you a real example of this. I've done two very big interviews recently with two specialists in the retro space, Atari and GOG, the retailer that sells it, and both of them, this is what I learned from Atari is emulation exists. Right. So if you're going to do a new thing, you can't just do the same game. You can remaster the game and put that out, but then put it out with a documentary, put it out with just the soundtracks attached to it. Do something to make your game stand out. So it's not, so people have a reason to buy it. Otherwise, they're just going to emulate it. Then I did an interview with GOG, and GOG recently put Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 on their platform. Not the remasters of Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, not the remakes of Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, of which both exist. The very original PS1 Sega Saturn games, the very original ones they put out. They put them out on GOG, and they did exceptionally well. Right? And that speaks to the contradiction that exists in this market. In that, yeah, you shouldn't just put out the same game again, but also you can, and you shouldn't change too much. But also, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake shows you that you absolutely can. So it is this contradiction. What I do say, there is a way of doing both. The GoldenEye remake, which never came out, by the way, licensing problems meant never came out. They had a toggle where you could play the game in this completely remastered, remade sort of beautiful looking game. But if you sat there and go, I want the original, you can toggle it, and it took you right back to the original. And Night Dive does that a lot with their games. They said, here's how we think you should be playing it now, because this is what modern games are like, and this is a lot better. But hey, if you want the antiquated controls, and you want the sort of pixelated visuals, and you want the Turok, they did remastered Turok, and Turok back then couldn't do draw distances, so it was horrible fog. You could never see more than 2 meters in front of you in the game Turok. They fixed that in the remaster, but they know there's an audience of people that want the fog, so you can just turn it back on. And so that's a way around doing it as well. Just do both.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned GoldenEye because it was going through my head as you were talking about games that it should be remade. And yeah, I wish it was. It was one of the games growing up that
Well,
cemented
that's
gaming for me. It's something that I
GoldenEye's
loved.
GoldenEye is
And
a great
I know,
example of how they got it wrong because they did do a remaster of GoldenEye, but it's really bad. And the remake never came out. They did a remaster. They did it quite lazily. And sure, if budgets sometimes are tight, you can't afford to do too much. But then don't do too much. Just do some things. Maybe do a port with a few tweaks and just make some look. Don't try and do too much if you've got too much budget. And that's kind of with the GoldenEye remaster. They sort of tried to do a bunch of things. They didn't do any of it very well because I imagine the team wasn't given a long time or a big budget in which to do it.
yeah, I remember also going to the Science Museum to their gaming exhibition that they've got on, and playing GoldenEye with the original controller and being absolutely unable to do anything. It was a bit of a shot at me in my gaming skills, and I love that game, but in modern controlling has
Was
moved
that
me
in
quite a bit.
Cambridge?
No, in the Science Museum in
Oh, the
London, they
actual
have
Science Museum. Okay, yeah.
they've got an awesome exhibition, which I think is permanent. It was in the basement when I went. The history of gaming. It's worth checking out. You'll be there for probably a long time. So pick a day when you've got nothing else to do. Let's move on. I want to kind of zoom out a little bit now, away from remakes and remasters. And we've seen some recent, quite high-profile failures in this space in the gaming world when it comes to new IP. Concord is the one that everyone talks about. The different numbers get thrown around, but it's in the hundreds of millions in terms of the money that was kind of lost after a couple of weeks when they realized it wasn't going to work. And there's other examples as well. The live service space, as we've spoken about, is insanely competitive and really hard to get into, but everyone wants to get into it because of the upside they've seen from obviously titles like Fortnite. And then you've got your GTAs, your Minecraft, your League of Legends, your Counter Strikes, these games that have been around for years and years, which kind of dominate when it comes to the big player metrics and engagement factors that we can look at. I just wanted to ask, do you think we're seeing a proper divergence in the player base where you've got the majority that stick to the one or two titles that they buy each year, and some of them may be free games or live service games, and that's what they buy. And those people who want to find new experiences are the minority, and they're the ones who are migrating to platforms like Steam or indie games where, as we've talked about, there is greater innovation. Did you see that divergence in the player base becoming kind of even greater?
Sort of. I mean, the industry is so broad now. I remember it wasn't that long ago where you knew what a gamer was, right? There might be a few, it might be kids and there might be older gamers and there might be, casual gamers. But broadly speaking, you had like three different groups of gamers or two different groups of gamers. Now everyone is a gamer. So yes, it's true that there are people that only play Fortnite, only play GT Online, only play EA Sports FC, NBA, whatever. But there's also true, and there are people out there that just bounce from game to game to game to game, playing indie games on Steam. There's millions of those people as well. There's all the people in between. There's people that it's just a very broad industry with lots and lots of different people in it, which is a good thing, but it can be quite hard to sort of when you're trying to identify a trend. Sometimes you can identify a trend and go against it and still be very successful. New experiences, people looking for new experiences, they're the minority, quite possibly, but not just because of live service. It's about those risk aversion I was talking about of people that just sort of gravitate towards that, those one or two titles that, or just the titles that they know. It's interesting because you talk about, but even live service has its contradictions. What's one of the biggest live service games right now? It's Ark Raiders, a brand new IP from a relative, I mean, they've had a game before that just, it's a new IP from a relatively new studio. It's not Battlefield, it's not Call of Duty, it's not Fortnite, it's completely new. Last year's biggest live service game, and it's still big, still now, so doing really big numbers, is Helldivers 2, which, yes, it's a sequel, but the original had nothing like the sequel. There is plenty, even in that space, where people are entrenched in what they call their home games, are playing it. Helldivers 2 is really interesting. I spoke to the CEO, Shams Georgiani, literally just before this call. He was telling me that 6 million people that played Helldivers 2 at launch were Call of Duty players. The game's nothing like Call of Duty, right? It's a shooter and it's an action game, but in terms of its actual core experience, it's very different. It's not twitch shooting, it's not rapid, it's not fast paced, it's not that kind of game. And it was people going, I love Call of Duty. I play it a lot. I'd love to play something else, something a bit different. And Helldivers comes along. Lots of their mates are playing it and they gave it a go. So you've got these communities that will give things a go. And you say Art Raiders right now is somehow holding its own in a market where just before Call of Duty comes out and just after Battlefield launches. So yeah, you answer your question. Yeah, new experience. People looking for new experiences probably are a smaller group of people. I still think that's a large, small group of people. But even in the spaces where Concord fails, there are games breaking through there as well, just a lot harder.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we said we'd come back to, which is discovery of content being an issue. And it's, you know, it's harder than ever, I think, to find new experiences. There's that kind of choice paralysis that we often see in entertainment. You see it with Netflix when you get to your wall of titles and you have no idea. And like you said, like on Apple, Ted Lasso is the most watched show. Friends is always up there on Netflix. And people just go back to what they've always watched or known, and the same maybe happens in gaming. Like, where do you feel we are with helping gamers find new experiences right now? Because obviously we're so plugged into the industry, you know, we read stuff, we listen to podcasts, we spend our lives talking about gaming, where, you know, a lot of gamers, they just rely on their friends. They maybe browse IGN or a similar site or listen to a podcast or chat to their friends on social media, but generally, yeah, no one is as plugged in as we are. Like, how do you think as an industry we can help more gamers find some of those experiences that you're talking about to pull those numbers even higher?
I would be a very rich man if I could answer that question. The discoverability crisis, and it's getting worse, right? With AI content sort of coming in, and the amount of things that are competing for things. Everyone uses that ridiculous Steam stat of how many games were released last year. There are obviously lots of people are trying to do things. There's a lot of curation going on. The games media is getting worse because, and it's not because there's no. Because of the changes at Google and AI on Google is making it harder for the games media to succeed. They're focusing on the bigger games, the games we already know about, guides to Pokemon and stuff like that is what delivers their revenue. So therefore, they're writing less about new things that are unproven, and that makes that situation worse. Social media algorithms are what they are. It is harder. You know, it's interesting. I was at an event, a Yuki event yesterday, every publisher I spoke to was saying, don't tell anyone, but nothing's working, right? And it was a really bleak thing for them to say. Obviously, they can still go through the motions. They can still do their things. They can put themselves in places where they can be discovered on Reddit, on Discords, building communities, get them to share stuff. You have to do it really hard. It's really hard graft, but you can do all the right things sometimes. You can build your communities up. You can get your wish lists up on Steam. You can, pay for placements on some big digital announcement shows and still end up selling very, very few units. It's interesting. My business partner is Jeff Keighley, and it's what I always find really interesting is that some of the games that I have covered lately, and I was a bit skeptical of his events, the Game Awards and stuff. They're quite expensive, hugely expensive to be on those shows. And he does sometimes, he selects some that I think can get in for free. I don't quite know the business model, but I do know it's very expensive on that show. But a lot of the people I speak to have had breakout hits, have been discovered via that. But those are really only affordable by the real top end AAA publishers, the biggest names. And yeah, it is. I don't think we're doing a good job, but I think the job is I think it's less about us failing as an industry, but just the job becoming harder and harder and harder and harder to do. And whether AI is going to make that harder or easier, I suspect it's the former.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone listening has a great idea for making discoverability of content easier for gamers, please.
I had,
years
ago, I was working on E3 very briefly, and we worked out the year before of all the announcement events that went on, all the indie announcement events and the big Summer Game Fest events and the Xbox Showcase, the PlayStation Showcase. There was something like 900 games announced over that period of time. It was a huge, ridiculous number. And that following year, when we got involved in E3, it never happened. E3 never happened again. We had this idea of creating an app where you put in your age, what genres you liked, all that kind of stuff. And the idea was that every games company would upload their announcements and their trailers into this app. And then they would get their own press conference, their own E3 press conference, where it featured games that were more tailored to you. Great idea, I thought. That never happened because E3 never happened. But that's the challenge, isn't it?
Maybe it's something for Gamescom to steal with no E3 going ahead. We've got a few minutes left. I'm going to just pop to the questions. There's a Q&A for everyone on the call. A little button you can add some questions in. We've had one which I think is quite interesting. We should quickly chat about. We're starting to see some sequels which struggle to hit the same sales as previous releases. Example, Assassin's Creed Shadows, which we struggled a little bit this year, which I actually thought was a really good game. I enjoyed the story, but sales-wise didn't do too well. Is there a point where relying on existing catalog becomes a commercial risk rather than a safe bet?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I think Assassin's Creed Shadows had unique challenges to it, where it had, to what it was. Every game has their own different issues. So, even we just saw Power Wash Simulator 2 launch, which is on the indie side of things, but everyone's still playing Power Wash Simulator. They're perfectly happy with the original game, and Civilization didn't do very well either. The new Borderlands 4 game didn't do as well as they thought it was going to do. There's a lot of examples of sequels not doing very well, not just sequels but IP. So look at the two big flops of Ubisoft. Last year. Technically last year, December 2023 to end of 2024, Avatar and Star Wars, bankable IP, bankable brands. There is no such thing as a sure hit. Absolutely isn't. I don't think it's an IP thing necessarily. I don't think the game was right, or the marketing wasn't right, or something fell away. That Assassin's Creed Shadows came under attack quite unreasonably for all sorts of different reasons. And actually, it did okay, but Ubisoft lowered its expectations, and actually, I think they were relatively okay with what it did. But yeah, there's no guarantee on it. And I think but you're right with AAA companies, and they know this. They can't just keep making sequels because you will get diminishing returns. So eventually, and so that's what they are. If you look at even the AAA companies, they do new IP. There's some new game development happening at these companies. EA, we talked about. I've forgotten the name of not It Takes Two. That was an EA published title. And then there's Take Two have got Judas coming up. Even the big companies are doing some new things as well. They are entrenching increasingly on that's not the bulk of it, but they do know they can't just keep relying on the same games. And sometimes you even see them going back to their back catalogue and resurrecting old ones as well to try and breathe to life new franchises.
Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear you talk that's part of the strategy for the bigger developers, at least, because that's one of the big things we found from our research, that the gamers just want balance, and a lot of gamers we spoke to are really tuned into this issue. They want the best of both worlds. They want the nostalgia driven experiences they get from a remake or whichever their favorite IP or franchise is, but then they want that experience that we all have as gamers, that moment where you play something and there's a scene or a moment or a protagonist or whatever it is that blows your mind away in a way that other entertainment properties don't. You don't get that from film and TV in the same way as gaming, because you're actively playing the game. And I think that's the thing that we kind of want developers and publishers to kind of take out from this. It's gaming is completely unique in its role in entertainment and the experience it delivers. And we just want to push developers to be a little bit more balanced in how they approach their catalog, and just to make sure we keep growing as an industry.
I think what's made it hard is the fact that games take so long to make, right? And there's a thing like, if you want to make a sequel to, Ken Levine made Bioshock Infinite, and then went, right, I'm going to make something different. He set up a new studio to make something different. That game he went to make different. This is 2013. This was decided. Still isn't out, and there hasn't been a new Bioshock since either. And you start seeing this, fans disappear off. There's not been an Elder Scrolls since Skyrim. It's been online, but there's not been a proper new Elder Scrolls since Skyrim, which was 2000, I can't remember, 8, 9. So it's a very 10. So very been a huge gaps between these games. So there's a pressure to keep, because the fans want the new thing, but they also want to do something completely different as well. And that's where I think we need to work out to get game development schedules down a little bit shorter, make those games a bit faster, so that we can get on the new IP as well as the new franchises. It's a challenge. It's to spin all those plates.
Yeah, and selfishly, more 20-hour to 30-hour single-player narrative experiences will keep me engaged in the
says
industry.
Old men with children.
Yeah, you called it exactly there. We're just about at time. Just finally, is you got one piece of advice, Chris, to developers, publishers, gaming professionals listening, about how they approach their catalog, and when should they use new IP versus existing catalog or franchises?
I think
it's a tough question.
Well, there was a few pieces of, I'm just conscious of repeating myself. I'd say that's different to what I said earlier when it comes to sort of your catalog. Do you put it at back catalogs is where a lot of the money is getting made now. There was a situation. Can you imagine, Martin, in year 2000, going back 10 years and playing Super Mario World being #1 in the charts from 1991? You couldn't imagine that. Whereas now, most played games are Fortnite and are Roblox and are The Sims and are GTA. Some of those games are older than 10 years. And so it's not like we now live in a world where you can bring back your games. You can, Fallout was the best. Fallout 4, released in 2015, was the best-selling game in April 2024. And that's because of the TV show came out, and it's because they did some discounting. People were also perfectly fine going back to Fallout 4. Like, people were fine going back to it because it still looks good. It still plays well. That wasn't the case, in generations gone by. So I guess when it comes to catalog, you don't actually have to remake or remaster games. You talk about nostalgia loop being shorter. If the nostalgia loop really is shorter and people view games as 7, 8, 9 years ago as being, they're nostalgic for it, you don't have to remake or remaster. You could re-release or update or repackage, tie it in with some other other entertainment expansion, things like that. And you can then focus on maybe your core teams making something new, while you utilize the fact that there's a genuine thought. If fans want old games, well, those games are out there. They exist. Make sure they can play them. Make sure they're on the modern platforms. Make sure they can get access to them, and then you can maybe put your investment for your new teams into something that's a bit different.
Awesome. I feel like this is a conversation that we could probably have part 2, 3, and 4, and maybe still not come up with the definitive answer, but still have a good conversation for hours and hours. But Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin.
It was a really interesting conversation. I will give you 10, 15 seconds to give your podcast a plug. I listen to it. It's an awesome podcast. Who are you interviewing next?
It's the CEO of Bandai Namco Entertainment. She's never done an interview before, and that's going out on Tuesday. Actually, Matt, I'm already ahead of myself. And tomorrow is the news analysis show on thegamebusiness.com. It's got Shams Georgiani, who made Helldivers 2, is my guest host on it. We're talking about, I don't know if it's been announced yet, there's some new Steam hardware that's being announced today. We talked about that. We also talk about the GTA 6 delay, and we talked about the layoffs at Square Enix and all sorts of things. It's a really good chat. He's a very smart man, and he's running one of the biggest live service games at the moment, and he's got certainly good views and good advice for people. So that's tomorrow's show. You can listen to it. You can also read it. I write it up. It's not all, you don't have to plug it in and listen to it as well. So you can subscribe to thegamebusiness.com. It's free.
Perfect. And I'm going to do my same shameless plug. If anyone listening wants more information on the research that we've run, our Remake versus Innovate report, please do get in touch. Find us on LinkedIn, or the details in your invite to this webinar. But Chris, again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Have a great evening, and thank you to everyone for tuning in.
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you.